So let's see. The time is moving and we seem to be all good.
Good.
So, should we
Sure.
start? Yeah, perfect. Welcome everyone. We are going to have a very interesting episode as I get to discuss walking behavior across the lifespan. And we have a brilliant guest for the episode. Our guest is a professor and a dean of the College of Health and Human Services in University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She has published over 300 articles and is one of the most cited authors in the field of physical activity. Her paper, How Many Steps Per Day Are Enough? Preliminary Pedometer Indices for Public Health, has been cited over 1,200 times. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Professor Catrine Tudor-Locke. Welcome, Catrine.
Well, thank you for having me, Ali. This is a joy.
Yeah, nice to have you. So, would you like to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your research career?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally Canadian. That's where I typically start off. And I did all my academic training up in Canada. I did a bachelor's of physical education, focused on physical education at a small local university in Alberta. And I did my master's in kinesiology in Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, so the other end of the country. And then I ended up doing my PhD at the University of Waterloo, Central Canada in Ontario. And at that time, my PhD, I decided to go into public health. So I brought physical activity and my interest in physical activity to public health, and that's how I kind of got into it there. So I got my first tenure track position at Arizona State University. And so that was my early career. So I spent about 7 years there. And my career was taking off. I was getting lots of recognition. I was publishing a lot on walking behavior, working with some great scientists across the world, traveling a lot around the world and engaging. And that was a lot of fun. But when I got tenure, I had a decision to make about whether I wanted to continue on that academic track. And I decided I just didn't want to do that. And so I walked away from tenure after doing a sabbatical in Australia and reflecting on it. And I became an entrepreneurial scientist at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I was for about another 7-8 years. And all I did was research, which was fantastic. It was, I didn't do committee work. I didn't do any teaching. I did mentor some postdocs. I just was writing grants, conducting research, writing papers, engaging with scientists, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Great colleagues, still engage a lot with them. But there came a point in my career that I just felt a need to have a greater impact. And perhaps because I'm what's considered a first generation student myself, which means the first of my generation in my family to go to university. And I just felt I needed to give back. And I found the way to do that is through administration. So a lot of my scientist friends were probably like shocked in horror that I would step off the research track and deliberately go into admin. But I became a chair of a department of kinesiology at UMass Amherst. And then I became an associate dean for research and administration, also at UMass Amherst. And then in August 2019, I was offered the position of Dean of the College of Health and Human Services here at UNC Charlotte. And I agreed to take this, but I said to the individuals who hiring me, I said, only if I can continue to be research active. And they said, nobody ever wants that. And I went, well, I do. And so I brought my research laboratory here. I've had some postdocs have worked with me. I've had some PhD students and now some undergrads. Again, I'm having fun while doing administration. And we just recently heard that we got a very good score on another grant. So I think I'm going to be in the business for another 5 to 7 years. So that should be fun. So that's the long story.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So you had the chance to be just fully doing research and you wanted to go to admin. That's not very common in the research community. And you wanted to make an impact. How has it been now doing admin in an important role? And how do you have time to also do research?
Once upon a time, one of my colleagues told me, he said, hire a great team and you'll never ever have to work a day in your life. And I remember thinking about that and I'm going, that's it. I surround myself with great people, great postdocs, fantastic PhD students, graduate students, undergrads, staff, and everybody is fantastic. They're all working towards the same goal. And then in my administration life, of course, I've got lots of great faculty and admin, and they also are actually very supportive of my desire to keep active in research. I also teach. Again, kind of unheard of, but I enjoy it. And it allows me an opportunity to interact with the students and also understand what the faculty are going through. I'm busy, but again, when you have a part of a team, it's not like I have to do all the work. I am the mentor. I am the senior person. I'm the one who coordinates things or has a vision or supports. But as you can see from my publications, a lot of them are no longer first authored by me. And I'm just happy to be able to help others open that door and launch their careers and engage. And so that's how I keep active.
And if I go back to this, you were in Pennington Biomedical Research Center, and they only do research. Is there many institutes like that, and is it a possibility for many researchers?
No, it's an unusual paradigm. Oftentimes, young people on the academic track that are interested in a research career will oftentimes do their postdoc, and then they might go into like research and development with corporation and therefore do research all the time. But academic institutions, it's not as frequent. They may have research positions, research professor positions, but they aren't tenure track and they are contingent on funding. As Pennington was, you had to bring in your own salary. So there was, it was a pressure, but a different type of pressure. I mean, in a typical academic setting, you have pressure, but like I say, it's just a different angle. You're doing teaching, research, and service. Whereas this, all I did was research, but there was high pressure to be productive. So same thing, just a different way of doing things. That's all.
So basically, if we go to your research, you've been doing basically walking behavior research quite a bit. And could you tell more what kind of things you are actually studying, what kind of things you can study when you are studying walking behavior?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because we all walk, and we all walk from those first steps we take into the last ones we take in our life. But I found, there's so much to be answered, so much to study, and that was good for me. I got into quantification of it very quickly. So, step counting, and I got into that because I was trying to find something that was simple and accessible and intuitive and could work specifically with people with type 2 diabetes at that moment when I was working on it. But it can translate across all groups because, able-bodied people across the lifespan are able to walk. So I got into trying to figure out things. As I mentioned before, I had to write the book on practical pedometry, like how many steps do pregnant women take? How many steps do 6-year-olds take? How many days do you have to wear a device in order to have a reliable measure? Can you wear them for 24 hours? All of that stuff that just has to do with the measurement of it was a wonderful rabbit hole for me to dive down, even before I got into intervention work. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to provide that direction. And it was a bit of an uphill battle because I was often, I would hear criticism that I was obsessed with step counting, that I was too simplistic, that I just didn't get the bigger picture. And I could see other colleagues that were choosing different directions with accelerometry, with activity counts, doing calorie counting. I could see that. And I never dissed it. You know what I mean? I just thought I was still focused on a more simplistic, feasible direct answer. So I'm always okay with that, but I definitely was received criticism. But you just stay true to your path, and it worked out for me. So more recently, and I'm happy because, of course, there was this wave of step counting devices now, and I'd like to say I've played some small role in kind of launching the foundational information around that. But more recently, I've been focused more on cadence. So the idea of the speed at which you take your steps. And the reason I got into that was, again, I always talk to the young people that I mentor. I say, you listen closely to your critics, and because they always have some truth in what they're saying. And there was some criticism of my work that saying, she's too focused on volume of physical activity, and she's not paying attention to tenets of intensity. There's intensity as well. You should focus on intensity. So I kept focusing on that and going, okay, well, why isn't cadence a marker of intensity? And again, I was told, oh, that's too simplistic. And I went, well, let's try some studies. So I did a pilot study and showed that there was a very tight relationship between intensity and cadence. Okay. And then I was able to parlay that into a larger study that proved again, there's a very tight correlation of over 0.9 of intensity measured as oxygen consumption and cadence across a range of heights. And I went, okay, so we put in another grant, got an NIH award to look at this in kids, which was great because that was across the developmental lifespan, all different heights. And we showed there was a strong relationship. And then I got an NIA, National Institute of Aging grant to do that in adults. And again, strong relationship, so much so that we could actually say with great confidence a number of steps that was related to moderate and vigorous intensity as they are commonly measured in absolute terms. And so the punchline there is we've been able to show in adults from 21 all the way to 85 years of age that 100 steps per minute is a very good proxy indicator of moderate intensity, which is 3 METs or 3 which is considered moderate intensity, absolutely defined, 3 mils per kilogram per minute. So it is, 3.5 mils per kilogram per minute oxygen consumption, and is 1 MET. And so 3 METs is a multiple of that. So we've been able to show that, and that's solid from 21 all the way to 85. With regards to vigorous, for 21 all the way to 60, we've shown that 130 steps per minute is vigorous intensity, or 6 METs. And in the few older adults from the ones who were 61 to 85 that could reach vigorous intensity, 130 worked as well. But there were so few older adults that could reach vigorous intensity that it was almost like it's a moot point. Yeah, technically we could say 130 for them as well, but it didn't matter for most older adults. Although, we'd want to repeat that with older adults who run regularly or something like that. And I'm fairly confident that we'll come up with the same number because the data kept showing it over and over again. And we've published those papers and we've published the data. So if you go to those papers, I've put all the data in supplemental files because I thought, people have to be able to play with this data. And I hope that, faculty out there are allowing their students to play with those data that we've published out there and come to their own conclusions or replicate what we did. Either one, I'm happy with that. So.
So basically it seems that when we increase intensity of walking, we are not increasing the length of step, but we are just taking steps faster.
Well, both. I mean, those of my that's when I talk about having great teams. I have highly interdisciplinary teams. So I have the biomechanists on my team, and I have the physiologists on my team and all that. So the biomechanists would say, hey, if you're increasing speed, you are increasing cadence and stride length almost at the same ratio. And when you start to run, then you might get a little bit more in the sense of stride length over cadence. But during that whole walking phase, it's really very tightly. You wouldn't increase one, you increase the other. So from a measurement point of view, I only have to measure cadence. And the why I care about that is because the devices, I can get cadence from that. Not always can I get stride length, right? Because you'd have to have some sort of positional device. But I can also now look at video recording of crowds and count cadence. And I don't even have to see their feet to do that, because your heads bob up and down in time with, the strides. So there's a number of ways that we can use counting of cadence to inform research without having to have devices. And then the other thing is, I always say, you don't even have to have a device on to know your cadence, because all you have to do is have some sort of, just like taking your heart rate, just some sort of device where you're measuring time, and then you count in your head what your step is for 10 or 15 seconds, and then you multiply it either by 6 or 4, depending on how you've counted that. And bada boom, bada bing, you've got your cadence. And that's very useful. Where I'd like to go with this is I do believe we're going to get more precision, and we know we're getting funding now for a child level grant where we're going to provide even more precision, so that we will be developing an R Shiny tool where individuals will be able to put in their height, weight, sex, and a few other things, and come up with a more precise estimate of cadence related to intensity that would be more individualized. And where I hope to go with that is eventually, for example, in cardiac rehab, instead of having heart rate target zones, we could actually have cadence training target zones that would be a little bit more accessible to individuals without having to wear a heart rate monitor, and still be able to confidently say they are working at the intensity that they individually need to work at, and then can over time increase that.
Yeah, so quite interesting that basically you can just, from the bouncing of the head, you can measure it and then instruct people easier, so it's easier for them to understand. What other applications you see, or what other advantages you see for this method?
Yeah, so I've been focusing a lot on measurement, and I'm trying to tighten up the measurement, but ultimately the end game is around intervention and informing public health guidelines. And so, public health guidelines now are described as, you take so many minutes per week, 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity activity, like a walking or what have you. But when we get down to the public health guidelines and they're saying moderate intensity, we'll say, well, what is that? And they'll say, well, it's 3 METs. And they say, well, what does that mean? And they'll say, well, this many calories. And you're going, well, what does that mean? And they'll say, well, this percent of heart rate max. And what does that mean? And so eventually they try to make it easier by saying brisk walking. But that's so vague, right? And it's tough to measure. So I wanted to get something that is digital, quantified, but it's simple and intuitive. So when I talk to a person, I said, well, at least 100 steps per minute. And they go, oh, thank you. Thank you. But then they'll go out and walk and they'll say, hey, I walk at faster than 100 steps per minute. I went, yes, because it's fairly easy for a normally paced walk, a self-paced walk for most adults are easily over 100 steps per minute. And I don't say slow down to 100 steps per minute. I mean, just at least 100 steps per minute. But for example, when I walk my dogs, I'm at 111 steps per minute. And I'm not necessarily booking it. The dogs have to pace themselves too. But it just provides a way to communicate. And then individually, if a person is at 111 and then they want to increase their activity, then they can go up to 115 or they can go up to 120 or what have you. And over time, I mean, it's possible to do high intensity interval training using soundtracks that would provide, metronomes, which would be very boring, but music that is stretched or bent to fit specific beats per minute, because people we know from other literature will be influenced. Their cadence will be influenced by music. And so we could do mass interventions that way. We could do individual interventions. People have been using music for a while, but here's a way to be more precisely managing your intensity through this. So that's another application.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think nowadays most of the podcast apps you can speed up like 1.1, 1.2. So basically, if you would have the music in such a player, you could kind of ramp it up
Yeah,
slowly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And you can either have it pre-programmed or, like you say, right at that moment, you can take it up or not. And it's kind of funny because I'll talk to people and they said, I've been running with music for years, and I'm going, yes, you have, and yet nobody has really put the science to it to quantify it. See, another thing that I'm interested in is when you read the lay journals like Runner's World and so on like that, they will talk about the best training cadence, and they'll say like 170 to 180. And I've always been fascinated about that. And so I've done literature search to find out where it happens. And there isn't a lot of science that I can find that says, there. And I'm going, well, that's for some young enterprising scientist to bring the evidence, for this. Because I think it's fascinating to me that here's something that, the Romans were counting steps back thousands of years ago. And it's only now that we're actually getting to the point of, oh, yes, this step counting thing, it actually has, there's evidence in it that can be used. And we can measure it in a number of ways and use it to inform different things. So, like I said, this will probably be my legacy, and I'm good with it.